states that 80 countries are experiencing water shortages. That's more than 2 billion people that don't have access to clean, fresh water. This is an international issue, and I don't want our province contributing to that number.
We haven't learned from our past with DDT, CFCs, nuclear power, GMOs, that we should not rush into new technologies when we are so ignorant. Signed, David Suzuki.
Shale gas has got to go, hey, oh. Shale gas has got to go, hey, hey, oh.
No matter how fantastic the regulations are and the laws that your government puts into place here, I don't believe the fracking is going to be safe or done responsibly, because where I live in Alberta, Canada, they have the best regulations in the world, and some of the big companies ignore them, and when they are non-compliant and citizens that are affected present the non-compliance to the regulators then bully and shame and blame the citizens, and they do not enforce their regulations. It's impossible to protect health, communities, children, water.
We have grown up with what I call the myth of abundance, this notion that we have all the water in the world and therefore we can do whatever we want. We have seen water as our personal resource for our pleasure, convenience, and profit, not as the living element of an ecosystem that gives us all life.
Shale gas has got to go, hey, hey, oh. Shale gas has got to go, hey, hey, oh.
Industry comes to town, New Brunswick, Pennsylvania, New York, wherever, and the first thing they say is, ignore us, it's okay, we're just doing the same thing we've always been doing for 60 years. There's nothing new here, it's well-proven technology, we got it well in hand, we're experts at this. And they'll say, fracking, notice the word fracking here, I hate that word. Fracking for gas development is a 60-year-old well-proven technology. That's a true statement. Fracking as a commercial enterprise in support of oil and gas development has been commercially used for 60 years in over 1 million oil and gas wells around the world. It's well proven because it's been used over 1 million times. It's been evolved, adapted, modified so that it works as planned on conventional oil and gas wells. That's the phrase that's missing. Fracking for gas development is a 60-year-old well-proven technology for the development of conventional oil and gas wells. But we're not talking about conventional oil and gas wells, you're supposed to respond. What we're talking about is unconventional oil and gas wells.
My answer is simple. What every victim wants: justice. I also desperately want no community in New Brunswick to ever experience the stress, the grief, the frustration, and the environmental damages that Penobsquis has suffered. Thank you.
We can stop the hydrofracking. Yes, we can. Yes, we can. We can stop the hydrofracking. Yes, we can. Yes, we can. We can stop the hydrofracking and send the frackers packing and vote to keep them out. Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Unconventional gas development from shales is called unconventional because it had to rely on the relatively recent conjunction of 4 new technologies. First horizontal well. Remember that first bit of technology, the ability to go horizontal? 1991, not 1947. Slick water fracturing, the chemistry to make the water slicker. 1996, not 1947. Multi-stage slickwater fracturing of horizontal wells, 2002, not 1947. And finally, the use of multi-well pads and cluster drilling 4 years ago. So how old is the process of unconventional gas development from shale formations using current state of the practice? 4 years. How many wells in the world exemplify that practice? About 6,000, not 1 million. All right, so it's a myth. There has been insufficient time to conduct scientific investigations, not political investigations. Scientific investigations of the impacts due to this process and the inevitable accidents that are associated with it. What kind of scientific investigations would you like to have available right now before your province says, go? You'd like to know, well, can you prove to us scientifically what is or is not in the waste fluid that comes back up? Does it have norm in it? Does it have heavy metals in it? At what concentrations? Have there been scientific studies that ascertain what are the proper ways of disposing of that waste? Through sewage treatment plants, through effluent into surface water? Has there been a statistical scientific analysis of the rate of failure of the wells? Has anyone done a human health impact study to predict the increase in the number of illnesses and deaths that will result in a region as the result of a long-term development of this type involving tens of thousands of wells? Has there been a scientific study that assesses the true economic impact, not only the economic income, but the economic cost, including health costs and ecological costs of this process? None of those studies have been done anywhere. Some of those studies are underway, some places.
I live in Rosebud, Alberta. It's beautiful there. It's the beginning of the Badlands in Dinosaur Country near Drumheller. I'm about an hour northeast of Calgary. Yes, I still live there. It's very painful and very hard to live there. I do not believe it's my home anymore. It's an industrial invasion. What's happening there now, even though we have the lawsuit and have gone public with the lawsuit, in April last year, the regulator gave Encana approval to drill and frack more shallow gas wells right around me. One to the north of me, one immediately south of me, and Encana is so arrogant that they have even drilled under my already besieged land to drill and frack. One day, my nephew and I, we noticed that my water was white, and Encana had done a test on my water before they fractured right into the aquifer that supplies my well, and the test results by Encana said my water poured clear. So I looked at this and I thought something's really wrong. I talked to some colleagues that were geologists that had studied gas migration caused by industry in Alberta. It's a very well-known problem. And they told me, get your water tested, so I did. There were 15 water wells that went bad. The hamlet, the little village, they have their own water wells also, and they found kerosene, indicators of kerosene in the water. They found hexavalent chromium in one of the monitoring wells in the little village. Some of the water wells went completely dry, some went bad. We have very dangerous levels of methane. There is also ethane, propane, and butane in some water wells. The government did tests and they even indicate a match to Encana's shallow gas wells, but of course they ignore that data. It's too damning. I will sell everything I have and I will stay in a home I no longer feel safe in, but I'm going to stay because this is the fight of today.
There's a report that came out from DNR saying that they got $1 million in royalties for 46 wells. If you divide that on average, that's $22,000 on average per well. The government is throwing the numbers of $250 million to $450 million in royalties per year. For $250 million in royalties per year, that's 11,364 wells in a year. For $450 million in royalties, that's 20,455 wells per year. If we look at the water, at 5 million gallons on average per well, for $250 million in royalties, that's over 56 billion gallons of water to extract that gas. For $450 million in royalties per year, that's over 102 billion gallons of water per year. If we look at the chemicals, at 1% being chemicals in the fluid, that's 568 million gallons of chemicals for $250 million in royalties. And that's over 1,027 million gallons of straight up chemicals for the $450 million in royalties. That water is supposed to be treated in Alberta, Nova Scotia, which can only handle 7 million liters, or 1,849,000 gallons per year.
Someone yesterday told me in a big public forum of about 80 or so public officials that the government had signed a lease, and in that lease they were allotted certain royalties. For the first year after a well was producing, those royalties were forgone. So in order to get the industry to come in, I guess, they gave away the first year of royalties. Unfortunately, the first year that the well produces is the most productive, and it may produce more in the first year than it does the entire life of the well. Someone asked me about regulation, and do we think that your government can regulate this in a much tougher manner than other ones? And my response was, if they don't know that they just gave away the farm, how on earth are they going to know how to regulate the industry? And consequently, that probably was hundreds of billions of dollars that they just gave back to those companies.
Under our treaties, you have an obligation to protect the sacredness of the earth from contamination and exploitation, and to respect and care for the land that we have shared with you. The presence of oil, gas, and mining companies are in violation of our peace and friendship treaties that were signed between the Crown, its citizens, and the First People of this territory.
My door is always open, and I'll talk to anybody as a Minister of Natural Resources, and that's the way our government operates. So we want to listen to people, we'll listen to their concerns, whether it's a First Nations group, whether it's a Conservation Council, whatever group it is, we'll listen to them.
Today's a closed-door meeting. It's invitation only. Even the media can't get in to report on what's going on in that room. That isn't really an open-door process.
Well, we wanted to do this today as part of the steering committee process. The steering committee has been in place for a number of months, and they recommended that we bring different groups in and talk to the media at noon hour, talk to the media when it's over with. And
we're being asked to comment on these in these government meetings that will be held around the province. Oh, except there won't be any held anywhere where people live. I think there are probably several hundred people here from Moncton who would like to make their ideas known to the government. Well, there's no meeting in Moncton or in St. John or in Fredericton. So, I mean, it might just be an oversight.
Now I'm going to read what Bruce Northrup said. These 8 public meetings will provide an opportunity for an in-depth discussion about the new measures we are proposing to ensure any expansion of the oil and natural gas industry, in commas, I'm going to put shale gas, is done safely and to the maximum benefit of New Brunswickers. Okay, I will pause on the comment maximum benefit of New Brunswickers, okay? And I also think it should have been maximum benefit of all New Brunswickers. About 70 to 90% of New Brunswickers won't have an easy opportunity to go to one of these meetings. It also talks about an in-depth discussion, and I'm a little frustrated from talking to the experts who have come here, how many answers they don't have, okay? You're the experts. We hire you, we pay your bills. We don't expect to hear you say, oh, I don't know, I haven't thought about that. okay? We expect you to think of everything because as a citizen, I'm not going to think of everything. That's your job.
Mr. Parks, in his introduction, did not once use the words shale gas. The government, whatever the motives, in the way in which language, the simple language is being manipulated, is creating the impression of trying to confuse people by changing discussion about something that's of some concern, changing the discussion from something that's of very, very deep concern to something that's of less concern.
How many people are you hiring to be at the wellhead of each one of these wells to see that the truth is carried out? The army of people that you're going to need will certainly swallow up any royalties that you're thinking of getting.
We've been told by geologists that the gas that's in the ground has been there for 300 million years. Am I correct? Have you heard those figures? 300 million years. Okay. Is the gas going anywhere? So honestly, and I'm being serious, why the hurry? What's the hurry?
It really looks bad when, even in your own documents, you say, we're going to put money away. We're going to ask money from these companies to protect the damage that they may do to these things, like water. But we haven't classified the water, so we can't say what that water was like definitively before they got here. So when they do destroy it, they could say, well, it was just like that when we got here, and we have nothing to defend it with. And that's the sad and, I think, simple fact of water classification. And that's the great danger in the fact that water classification hasn't taken place.
Who in this room is against shale gas? Can you stand up? Against hydrofracking for shale gas. Government, does this say anything to you?
Listening?
Does this say anything to you at all?
Notice none of them stood up. That's really sad.
I think if we had a different government and you were working for that government that was against shale gas, then you would be taking that position. I do not believe that each of you wants shale gas in the province. You're doing a job, and that's what you're paid to do. I don't believe that you are not smart enough to think this through. I feel badly that we have to have politicians who, and industry, who say this is the position you have to take. And we already know there's many civil servants who don't voice their opinion on shale gas because of fear of loss of jobs.
Fluid migration from faulty wells is a rare phenomenon. Sometimes wells fail. I mean, they stop doing what they're supposed to do, which is to just take, in this case, natural gas from down there up to here through a steel pipe. That's the purpose of a well. If what's down there comes up here outside the well, that's called a faulty well. In industry jargon, it's called loss of wellbore integrity, structural failure. What's down there is now able to come up outside the well because you poked a hole in the rock and you haven't adequately sealed the hole. So industry says that that happens, but it's so rare that it's inconsequential and you shouldn't care about it. There is a gas, in this case it's mostly methane, that's bubbling up outside the well. It's not supposed to happen. The well has lost integrity. That methane is coming from thousands of feet underground. For it to get to the surface, what does it have to pass through? Aquifer, underground source of drinking water. This is industry data from Schlumberger. The authors of this paper went out and tested thousands of gas wells and oil wells for leakage, migration, vent pressure. And they found the following data. This is the age of the well, because they tested new wells as well as old wells. The vertical axis, I'll read it to you, it's the percentage of wells affected by sustained casing pressure. In other words, there's gas coming up outside the well. There are two things you should notice from this data. Let's look at the young wells, new ones. What's the rate of failure? Read it. Say it out loud. Say it loud enough for Fredericton to hear it. 5%. 1 in 20. Is that rare? Okay. By the time you get to aging wells, where are we now? 50 to 60%. It's industry data. This is 2011 data. Colleagues of ours at Duke University went into Pennsylvania and New York, and they tested a scientific hypothesis. They hypothesized that there must be a correlation between the concentration of methane in people's private drinking water wells and the distance of those private drinking water wells to the nearest shale gas well. How many people here on private water wells? Okay. I guarantee you that you all have methane in your water. I guarantee it. But most likely it's at a level 1,000 times lower than this. It says if you're within about 1 kilometer, 1,000 meters, the probability that you're going to have a high concentration is fairly substantial. 70% of the wells within 1 kilometer had large concentrations, high concentrations of methane. High, by the way, in the US, if you're at 10 milligrams per liter, that's danger signal. Do something. If you get to 28 milligrams per liter, run. Do not light a match. Do not operate your cell phone. Get the hell out, because you're about to have an explosion. You're at the explosive limit. In the first 9 months of this year, there were approximately 1,200 new shale gas wells drilled in Pennsylvania. 65 of them were cited for loss of wellbore integrity. What percentage of 1,200 is 65? 5%. As recently as 2 weeks ago, our Environmental Protection Agency confirmed that they have found significant quantities of frac fluid constituents in well water in Pavilion, Wyoming. The New York Times published an article about a month or so ago that showed that as early as 1988, our Environmental Protection Agency had in its files confirmed cases of frac fluid migration into people's private water wells. That article also goes on to quote people from the Environmental Protection Agency who were working at the EPA then, saying that it was just too bad that in most cases, it was impossible to release information about those contamination incidents to the public because there had been a legal agreement between the aggrieved party and the gas company to shut the hell up. So when you hear industry or government say, we will have really tough regulations such that we will avoid, prevent, prohibit any environmental problem, that is unadulterated BS.
My question is, why would the Brunswick government not look into amending the Environmental Act, the Clean Water Act, the Potable Water Act, in anticipation of exploration for our resources, to protect our resources and to have safe economic development on our resources?
In fact, the government is amending our legislation around water protection particularly, and Mark already outlined, but basically in 2009 or coming in 2010, the provincial government was working on a comprehensive water management strategy for the province. So a process and a document that would inventory the water resources that we have, and a process of identifying how we would then manage those resources going into the future, and that would assume to include something like shale gas exploration, given the amount of water that it requires. So that's been taken off the shelf. They're no longer working on that in that current form anyway. And then we had wetland legislation roll back. We had about 50% of wetlands that exist on the landscape no longer requiring any sort of permitting process whatsoever. So if it's not on a map that is posted on Service New Brunswick GeoNB database, it's not a wetland, even though it's clearly a wetland. We also, as Mark said, have a water classification program that watershed associations across the province worked for over a decade on collecting water quality data that contributed to a classification system, surface water quality standards, basically, for 22 watersheds. And just recently the government announced that they're no longer moving forward with implementing the regulation that would legally bind new resource activities, proponents, to maintain the standard that was classified, the work that was done to classify that. So from that, we can take that standard, that legally binding standard, is too stringent to allow resource extraction activities like shale gas and open pit mining.
Analysts and economists, both within the oil industry themselves and from outside certainly, have referred to it as things like the shale gas bubble or a Ponzi scheme. Essentially, it's based upon getting a lot of money up front by saying you've got 1 trillion cubic feet of product on the ground based on nothing except the fact that you say that you have it. Because just like in the financial crisis, they deregulated the part of the industry where there used to be a formula for saying how much was down there. Now you can pretty much say whatever you want. So you get a lot of money, you come in, and so you start drilling. The peculiar thing about shale gas is you have to drill lots of wells for geological reasons, and also for the fact that they deplete incredibly rapidly. You usually get about 85 to 90% of your yield in the first year or two. So you've got these bank loans to pay and dividends to pay to investors, so you've got to keep drilling to pay that. It doesn't matter that the price of shale gas has come down to the point where you're actually making either no profit or you're selling at a loss, because you've got to maintain the cash flow to pay off these dividends and loans, so you keep drilling more and more and more.
We've heard a lot of information tonight about shale gas, why we should go ahead and perhaps why we shouldn't. But if there's one lesson that you go home with tonight, is what's happened to our democracy. We made a conscientious effort to have representation from our elected officials to meet with us here for a conversation. That's all we wanted to do. They could have at least sent a representative.
The use of clustered multi-well pads reduces surface impacts. This one is the one that really irritates me because it's the most logically flawed statement. So the industry says, if we were to go into your 2.5 million acres that are permitted right now, and we were to drill a well here and then go a kilometer away and drill another well here, and then go a kilometer away and drill another well here, we're not going to do that. We're going to reduce that surface impact by just putting a pad here and then going a kilometer away and putting a pad here, and each pad's going to have 8, 10, 12, 16 wells. But wait a minute, that's apples and bananas. You would never, no company would ever drill one well here and then drill one well there and then drill one well there. It's uneconomic. They'd never do it. So the comparison is, if you're going to reduce impact, is either you drill or you don't. If you want to reduce surface impact, don't drill. This is the center of Dallas-Fort Worth. This is about 7 or 8 miles away. See all those white dots? Can you see them there? Is that clear? Every one of those white dots is a drill pad. This is the SWIN permitted area. So I've gone ahead and gone to Google Maps, and I've taken an area just north of Fredericton to ideally develop shale gas, if in fact there is gas in the shale there. They don't know that yet. But if they did, what would everything I told you look like? Each one of those yellow rectangles would be an area in which they would put a red dot. The red dot is the pad. And coming out of the pad, what would they do? Is that unlike the pattern I showed you at the Dallas-Fort Worth Airport or the pattern in northeastern British Columbia? No, it's exactly the same pattern. That's the way to get the gas out. The gas is everywhere there's shale, drill everywhere. If the 3D seismics and the experimental wells that are currently being done determine that there is an exploitable amount of shale gas in New Brunswick, this is the way it will happen.
We are a rural farming community turned into an industrial park. Industry changes the landscape forever. It changes not only the landscape, it changes the community in which you live. In my experience, it divides the community. It changes you to the very core of your being. It changes who you are.
gas wells in floodplains and gas wells and pipelines being built over subsidence areas, active subsidence areas where additional subsidence is expected. I mean, that's just stupid. It's foolish. It's asking for trouble. You can't expect pipelines that are designed for no subsidence to experience centimeters of subsidence and not overstress a pipeline. It's nonsense. It shouldn't be done. I don't know what else to say. It's obvious. I'm speaking as an engineer. It's stupid. Don't do it. So the health impact is that you're going to have long-term noise, dust, light pollution, NOx emissions, higher spill probabilities of frac fluid because of the high intensity of wells per unit area, and the high frac fluid volumes necessary, and the high frac fluid waste return volumes that are necessary. There's going to be venting and fugitive emissions of produced gases.
By now, you should probably have a pretty good idea that there's not just going to be a few wells. There's going to be tens of thousands of wells. Those wells are going to start getting closer and closer to homes. One of the things that I didn't realize I would recognize when I moved from Dish out of the Barnett Shale was that there's no truck traffic. And you can drive on the roads. So you're going to have these trucks, probably thousands of them, that are going to be driving on your roads. In Pennsylvania, the locals, for the most part, got jobs driving trucks or being security guards for the pad sites, things like that. That's not to say that someone couldn't go to work on one of the drilling rigs as an entry-level type position, but I think at least initially the crews are going to come from outside of this area. In Dish, there was people who benefited. There was people who got royalty payments and signing bonus payments. They've moved away. Actually surprised if I don't see one of them up here in one of my trips up here.
I think it's safe to say that Christmas is going to come a little early to Kings County. All of us who live in this area know how fortunate we are. We live in a beautiful part of the province, a little biased, maybe the most beautiful part of the province.
Certainly, this area has been long blessed with lots of natural resources, and they're being harnessed for the good of the local and provincial economies. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to announce that we will sign an agreement today that awards the right to explore and develop the Millstream deposit to Atlantic Potash Corporation of St. John.
Mr. Northrup, what assurances can you give the people who are outside and the people of Penobsquis who are really worried about this third mine? Actually, they're really against it.
That's in front of the mining commissioner right now. As we know, there is a group in front of the mining commissioner. That's an ongoing process which has been delayed for a month or 2 months or so. So don't really want to comment a lot on that.
That's the question.
Government did in fact pay to bring in a water treatment, water supply system to the community of Penobsquis. And government did pay for that. So I think government has taken responsibility, even though it wasn't their responsibility to do so. They did bring it in to help out the residents of Penobsquis.
This appears to mean that anybody with a problem with shale gas, with their wells, their houses, whatever, will receive the same sort of enthusiastic and dedicated help from the government that the people of Penobsquis have had.
For the past 10 years, Penobsquis has been a victim of industrial and government apathy and indifference. The list is long and many, all fueled by what appears to be government and corporate greed, fueled by apparent government ignorance, indifference, and incompetence.
Are there many risks that come with a potash mine environmentally?
It'll be under a strict regulatory system that we have in the province right now, which we're looking at, as you know, to strengthen up, and it'll be under the regulatory system of New Brunswick.
In Penobsquis, the government should be monitoring subsidence. The government should be monitoring water in areas that still have it. The government should be monitoring air quality. Why is that not happening?
The government of New Brunswick, time and time again, is saying, trust us, we will protect you. And yet, when the people of Penobsquis need the protection of their government, it is not given to them. Your government experts that you say will protect us. You talked about the regulations, you talked about hiring the experts you need to enforce these regulations and make sure that the companies are doing what the regulations say they must do, and yet the experience in Penobsquis is that your government experts, when called to testify against big industry, suddenly know nothing and remember nothing.
Yes! As far as water is concerned, if anyone is damaged as far as their water is concerned, we'll compensate them.
The issues regarding water were resolved in June. We went ahead and tried to go through the hearing process with our issues regarding subsidence and the damages to homes. The majority of us have decided to withdraw from that, although a couple of us are going on. But fundamentally, the process is flawed. We need change in the process. We need the government to look after people.
Angie Leonard is the Senior Natural Gas Advisor with the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers. And she was quoted in the July 3rd, 2012 edition of the Telegraph as saying, "This industry has been safely developing gas in Western Canada for decades, and we have had no groundwater contamination during that time." And I would guess that Jessica Ernst would probably take exception to that.
Our Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, they also studied industrial gas migration. They even titled their paper, Migration of Methane from Energy Wells.
I'm talking about the industry. You know, we're talking about banning the industry or moratorium on the industry, not on a single well. So who's going to make this decision? If all the doctors in the province say it's a bad idea, if we get a lot of new environmental studies are coming along that's saying that even with the best care, that you're going to have probably, you know, a pretty high percentage rate of failures. So if all those people say that it's bad, you know, who's making the decision? Is it just the premier? Is it you guys? What's the process? Is the public going to have input to that process?
First of all, it's definitely not the people in this room who are making that kind of decision. That's a policy.
I have asked Bruce Northrup at least 3 or 4 times about monitoring. Are these wells monitored? Will you monitor them? Is there leakage going on? How were they ever built on a floodplain? I have gotten a response. The Liberals did it. That was not under the Liberals, not I. No comment. We will look into it. I even wrote him, no response. Okay? Well, there are 17 wells that are probably leaking into the Penobsquis. That's not brain science. Even if they were licensed, okay, even if the lease with the company, with Corridor Resources said, oh, when we're not allowed to monitor it, government can't get in to monitor it, the Department of Environment can be ordered to monitor the river, the Penobsquis River, below these 17 wells, and see if there's methane getting into the river. There's been dead fish coming up all summer. Oh, do we have to wait for a fish kill? And the guy on the phone said to me off the record, well, these Corridor Resources wells got there because we issued variances for them. So it didn't matter that we had a Wetland Act, a Clean Water Act, or a Clean Environment Act. It was immaterial. Your regulations are immaterial. What does it matter? And you can always do it.
Natural gas is a clean fossil fuel. True or false? No, come on. As it's written, it's true. If I take an energy equivalent quantity of coal, oil, and natural gas, they contain the same amount of energy, and I burn them, which of those 3 fossil fuels produces the most carbon dioxide? Coal. which produces the next highest amount of carbon dioxide? Oil, which produces by far the least carbon dioxide? Natural gas. Is natural gas a clean fossil fuel? When you burn natural gas, it is cleaner than coal or oil. That's a true statement. Is that a true statement? Why? Because, wait a minute, hold everything. We better take everything into account. I mean, to get the gas out of the ground, you got to drill a hole. You got to create a pad. You got to drive trucks. You got to operate equipment. And then you got to frack it. And then when it comes back, what comes back with the frack fluid? A lot of gas. And what are you going to do with that gas? Some people say flare it. Well, not always. There are entire states in the United States that prohibit flaring. Well, then what happens to the gas that comes out during drilling and during fracking? Where does it go? If it doesn't go into a pipeline, which isn't going to be there every time, it gets vented. Methane is a much more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. Here's a molecule of methane, CH4. Here's a molecule of carbon dioxide, CO2. This molecule absorbs heat in the atmosphere many times greater than the ability of a carbon dioxide molecule to absorb heat. What do I mean by many times? Depends upon how long you want to look and how long the molecule is resident in the atmosphere. If you take a long look and say, well, let's look out over 100 years, it turns out that methane molecule is about 33 times more potent than a carbon dioxide molecule. One methane molecule over a 100-year period will absorb as much heat as 33 carbon dioxide molecules. If you back off and say, I'm only worried about the next 20 years, because if we get to 30 years, we're toast. Pardon the pun. If I'm only worried about 20 years, that ratio goes from 33 to 105. One methane molecule absorbs as much heat as 105 carbon dioxide molecules, which means even a small amount of leakage of methane into the atmosphere has the same effect of a large amount of carbon dioxide by a factor of 100. Okay, how does methane get into the atmosphere due to the unconventional development of gas from shales? During initial drilling and frac fluid flowback, as I'll show you with another video, there's a large amount of methane emitted into the atmosphere. There's routine and continuous venting and leaks at the well pad. Count the number of joints in all of the equipment on a well pad. Okay. During liquid unloading, during gas processing, and during transmission, storage, and distribution through pipelines, there is leakage. There's purposeful venting whenever there's an overpressurization, whenever there's a compressor going on, there's purposeful leaking to control pressure. There's also fugitive emissions, leaks that you don't intend which are there. Aging gas pipelines, for example. Compressor stations that aren't maintained properly. Valves and fittings that aren't maintained properly. How much of the gas leaks? We'll get to that in a minute. Let me show you what it looks like. This is a regular photograph. Here you can see water vapor. When the stuff comes up, it's at 150 degrees C. And so you get water vapor that's evaporating into the atmosphere. You can see that with the naked eye. This is a video that was taken with a forward-looking infrared camera that is tuned to show in false color something you can't see with the naked eye, a hydrocarbon gas. Remember, methane is lighter, less dense than air, so it's naturally going to want to rise. It's also hot, so when it comes up to the surface, up it goes. To give you a scale, these are treetops. There's a bird that just flew across, and eventually we're going to pan back so we can see that piece of heavy equipment that you saw on the previous slide, so you get a scale. And there's the piece of heavy equipment. So this is not just the little leak, it's a billowing of methane. And that goes on for hours or days during the flowback period.
My taps started to sound like a whistling train because there was so much gas coming out, but I didn't know that's what it was. I thought I needed new plumbing or new taps. And one day I poured fresh water for my dogs, and they backed away from the water, and then I knew in my gut something was wrong with the water. The water is too dangerous to even have connected to my home, so I haul my own water. It's not a nice way to live.
We will save our lands and keep our waters clean. Waters clean! We will save our lands and keep our waters clean. Waters clean! All together, let's get to it. Solidarity will do it. We New Brunswickers can keep our province green. Province green!
I myself am lucky enough to live in New Brunswick and have a job in oil and gas. I enjoy my work every day. I get up, I go, haven't missed a day in 2 years. I'm perfectly healthy, fine, 22 years of age. I got tickets, licensed millwright from here to British Columbia. I feel comfortable with this. If this doesn't go forward, I'm packing my bags, I'm selling my house, I'm moving to Alberta, and I'll send transfer payments back to New Brunswick to support all of you.
All you have to do is talk to your politicians about what's important. These people here. No, I'm not disagreeing with you. They don't listen, but these people do, and you're angry at them. All right? The oil field is a dangerous place to work no matter where you put it or what you do with it. It's not hydraulic fracking that's dangerous. It's everything from the start to the finish. It's shipping pipe, raising derricks, moving equipment, standing on a rig floor. It's all dangerous. But where do we get it from? Where does oil come from now? Saudi Arabia. And how do they treat people in Saudi Arabia? They got a union?
So they don't act up.
That's right. They put nails in their hands so they don't act up. Where does the money come from in this province? It comes from Alberta. Do they frack in Alberta? We're not all right with fracking. Why are we getting money from people that do frack?
So you want your kids to work in a dangerous place in New Brunswick instead of in
No, I don't. If you're not for fracking, don't take the money for it. And I don't want oil from a country that sticks nails in people's hands.
Oh, God.
Does your mandate give you the ability to recommend a moratorium or a ban to the province, or at the very least to initiate public hearings that would give New Brunswickers, all New Brunswickers, an opportunity to ask the question, do we really want shale gas development in the first place?
My mandate requires that I report to government what I've heard, but I don't have a mandate to decide whether a moratorium can take place. I can suggest that many people have suggested a moratorium, and the government will have to decide how it acts on that, but I can't make a recommendation on that issue.
Nationwide insurance company is expected to announce any day that, quote, after months of research and discussion, we have determined that the exposures presented by hydraulic fracturing are too great to ignore. For several types of insurance, the, quote, risks involved with hydraulic fracturing are now prohibited.
We don't have a more important resource than fresh water. It makes no sense to me to be putting that at risk for a short-term industry demonstrated to be anything but straightforward, that will make a mess of our roads, make a mess of the countryside, pollute our air, threaten our health, threaten other industries that rely on a good environment, and accelerate climate change.
Which was the 30-meter buffer zone on rivers where you're not supposed to cut. Very simple, no large national companies involved there. And when I called the Department of Environment in St. John regarding one of those issues, they said, we've been told we're not allowed to go out and inspect for this because we don't have enough people. If someone calls us, then we'll investigate. And people don't get fined, they're not required to remediate. So if something this simple can't be done, how can you expect the people in the province of New Brunswick to have faith that you're going to regulate and enforce something as complicated and complex with a lobby group as powerful as the oil and gas industry? It's not possible. You're not going to gain the trust and confidence because you're not going to do it.
I have done more research in this last 12 months than I think I ever did at university in 4 years of university. I have met the most extraordinary people that I'm so proud to call my friends, because these people have some of the highest integrity that I have come across. This is an integrity that seems to be lacking in the government and in this industry, which I suppose has been the most disillusioning thing about this whole process is I thought we lived in a democracy.
We need to demand a green economy. This is the big elephant in the room that people don't seem to talk about, but it has to be done, and we all know this. Our environment is in a state of emergency. For my child's future and all future generations, why are we going after the end game in fossil fuels, shale gas? We know we're going to run out eventually. We keep digging deeper and going into more dangerous areas like the Arctic, the oceans, with more high risks. We need to stop this, and we've got to start talking about something else.
About 20 years ago, when some countries in Europe started to get serious about renewable energy, countries like Germany and Denmark, they started proposing modest targets. We're going to go for 10% renewable in 10 years, and they reached it in 6 years. And then they said, we'll go for 20% in 10 more years, and they reached it in another 6 years. Now Germany is shooting for targets of 50-60% renewable energy. Denmark recently announced a commitment to 100% renewable energy. So I'd love to see our province and our country become a leader in renewable energy rather than a perpetual laggard as we have become. So the future is clearly in renewable energy. That's a constructive way forward on this issue. This is not just about saying no to development, it's about saying yes to the right forms of development. So thank you very much.
Following a recent annual general meeting of the College of Family Physicians, members of our college voted on a resolution against hydraulic fracturing in New Brunswick. By a letter sent to each member of the Legislative Assembly, we are urging the government to protect our valuable resources and the public's health by putting a moratorium on hydraulic fracturing development in New Brunswick until further research can prove that the benefits clearly outweigh the risk of this practice.
I think this is the bottom line. When it comes to hydrofracking, the guiding principle should be first, do no harm, and that there's a need for scientific and epidemiologic information on the health impacts. And this is, so frankly, no one should be unleashing even more fracking before we have the scientific facts. If shale gas was a pharmaceutical, it wouldn't be allowed on the market. Okay? It doesn't have a record of safety. These are involuntary exposures. It's not like buying a can of soup. You say, okay, it's on the label. You have to tell people what's on the label. Well, even if we knew what was in the air, we can't opt out of breathing it. Remember that it's considered unethical to use human subjects in a scientific study without their permission. Okay? And so what they're saying is, without rigorous scientific studies, the gas drilling boom is going to remain an uncontrolled health experiment on an enormous scale. That's what it is. We're potentially the guinea pigs, and we have a right to say no.
I have two small children, one's 6 and one's 9 now, and both of those children would get pretty substantial nosebleeds while they were sleeping. And those nosebleeds coincided with the strong odors that we would have. And if you do much research, nosebleeds can be from chemical exposure. They can also be in the wintertime. Some people get nosebleeds in the wintertime, and people tell me, well, I have nosebleeds all the time. I haven't seen anybody have nosebleeds like my kids have nosebleeds, or they were having, in the middle of the night. Memorial Day of 2010, that night, we woke up to my youngest son crying. He had blood coming out of his nose, all over his shirt, on his hands, down the wall, down the hallway, into his brother's room, into his bed, blood all over his bed. And simply, when I woke up the next morning, kissed my wife goodbye, she said, that's it. And you can say whatever you would like to say about that decision, but you cannot take that chance. You cannot take that chance with the health of a 5-year-old child.
When the water wells began to go bad, Encana promised the Rosebud Dinner Theatre $150,000. I say to you, say no to the poisoned apple. This is how they divide and conquer communities, in my view. And you must have compassion for the people who lose their temper and the people who sign the leases, because it's your community they want to destroy. I used to think the water was the worst loss. And just this last year, I realized that it is a very little loss. It is the destroyed communities. The people don't trust each other. They want money over people suffering. But have compassion for that.
We came today with the sole purpose of letting everybody know that yes, there are some people in this province who are in favor of this process. We don't believe it's a harmful process when done properly.
We have to say, as Canadians, as well as New Brunswickers, no to fracking, yes to green jobs, more jobs, and an economy that will be healthy for our kids without polluting our water, without destabilizing our seismic systems, without creating more greenhouse gases, because natural gas that comes from fracking is not low on greenhouse gases. In fact, it is, as demonstrated by recent studies, a significant risk to planetary warming and the kinds of disastrous weather systems that we saw this last summer. We need to take steps to break our addiction to fossil fuels. We need to do it sooner than later. We need to do it now. And I commend everyone in New Brunswick who's standing up and saying, no fracking way.
You have information we did not have. You have already a massive army that us in the West had nothing of because we had none of this information.
I would be glad to engage in a one-on-one, mano-a-mano, open debate in front of the minister, the premier, the opposition, the government, the public. You name the time, you name the place.
What we get, or the lack of what we get, will impact those affected by other developments in other areas, whether it's shale gas or a Sissenbrook mine or a mine anywhere in the province.
I recently forwarded a letter to our local newspaper, and I suggested that should an accident occur with fracking in our province, that the government's reaction would be predictable. Point one, they would tell us that our government is truly saddened to hear of this unexpected event. Point two, we, your government, have launched a full investigation into the matter. Point three, the company involved has assured us they will have expertise available from their resources to assist with the investigation. Point four, in the foreseeable future, we will ensure that all affected residents will have an ample supply of bottled water for daily use. And point five, should any citizen have any further question or concerns, they can speak to our legal department.
We're looking to raise enough money to put on the same level of evidence as the corporations seeking to come to New Brunswick and mine the shale gas. If we can find more people to give to Hampton Water First, we will achieve our goal of $500,000 in order to fund this court action. $100 is much better than signing a petition. It's much better than marching about with a placard. What it is you're putting your money where your mouth is.